I just wanted to just keep it, simple and plain, angelic, and not really try to overdo it with the theme, but just, have it be more
Suited and booted. I always wear a dress, so I wanted to try something different.
Yeah, it's just like everyday life for us.
Imagine walking into a mansion and discovering not a vault of jewels or rare wine, but rows of baby oil and Astroglide stacked with precision. This isn't fiction. It's what a jury just saw in Diddy's case, and it's turning heads for all the wrong reasons. 1. When the raid became the show in March 2024, federal agents stormed Sean Diddy Combs' Los Angeles home. What they uncovered wasn't just shocking, it was theatrical. Photos shown in court revealed drawer after drawer, bag after bag, packed with sex-related supplies. We're talking around 200 bottles of baby oil and nearly 900 bottles of Astroglide lubricant, not stashed randomly, stored meticulously in drawers, cases, and even a climate-controlled unit. This stash wasn't tucked away like clutter. It looked intentional, organized, maintained, like someone was preparing for regular, large-scale events. The room itself almost looked like a supply station for something far more elaborate than a personal hobby. And in court, when those photos were displayed, the atmosphere shifted. What had been abstract claims suddenly became very, very visual. Flatter, 2. A glimpse behind the velvet curtain. Brendan Paul, Diddy's former assistant, offered a sobering glimpse into how that stash was allegedly used. According to his testimony, these supplies weren't just for private moments. They were for events called freak-offs. These parties, he claimed, were routine, sometimes lasting multiple days, and always prepped with the same materials: baby oil, Astroglide, candles, liquor, drugs, condoms, mood lights. Paul described how he'd book rooms in advance, sometimes at hotels, and arrange them exactly how Diddy liked. Romantic lighting, clean sheets, oils, and candles set up in a certain order. He called it a setup ritual. Then, when the parties ended, he would clean up, disinfecting, scrubbing, sometimes even wearing gloves to avoid touching what had been left behind. It wasn't just assistance. It was maintenance of a lifestyle.
And I told Puff about it and have him give me a call. So we FaceTimed and they had their man talk and he said, make it believable.
Muerti 3. Cassie's testimony. The emotional toll. Diddy's ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, who has since filed her own explosive civil suit, confirmed many of the logistics. But what Paul shared in facts, Cassie brought alive in emotion. She spoke about how these parties weren't rare. They were expected. Some lasted 3 or 4 days. Some involved drugs she said she never agreed to take, and some, she alleged, felt less like celebrations and more like manipulation masked as intimacy. She described a relationship where power wasn't shared. It was used. She said she felt objectified, overpowered, and at times, terrified. Her voice shook during parts of her testimony, but what stood out most was the pattern she outlined. Everything was repeated, timed, deliberate. And when jurors looked at the stash photos after hearing her story, those images suddenly became symbolic of more than just excess. They hinted at routine abuse. Corner 4. The role of preparation. Why does any of this matter in a legal sense? Because prosecutors are trying to prove intent. They aren't just saying Diddy liked wild nights. They're saying he engineered them, that he planned and supplied environments where control was skewed and consent, at best, was questionable. The lubricants, mood lights, candles, pills, prosecutors argue, weren't accessories. They were part of a repeated pattern of power. They weren't random items scattered across a bachelor pad. They were the visual blueprint of a carefully structured experience. And when agents also found drugs like pink ketamine, bottles of prescription pills under aliases, and thousands in cash, the story got darker. The mansion, they say, was a headquarters, not a home.
And I told Puff about it and have him give me a call. So we FaceTimed and they had their man talk and he said, make it believable.
Frere 5. The jury's journey, like every courtroom drama, this one has its fair share of complications. One juror was removed for inconsistencies in responses. Another was dismissed for health issues. And delays in scheduling have made this one of the most drawn-out cases of the year. Yet despite the slow pace, the weight of the testimony has been anything but sluggish. 34 witnesses have spoken, dozens of photos have been reviewed, hours of video and audio have been analyzed. By now, jurors have seen a deeply layered portrait of who Diddy might be behind closed doors. They've heard voices crack, seen photos that made them shift in their seats. And whether or not they believe everything, one thing is clear: this isn't a typical celebrity trial. Facts. 6. The man at the center. What about Diddy? He's remained stoic. Barely a reaction. Always suited, always composed. His legal team claims he's the victim of a cultural misunderstanding, that his lifestyle, though unconventional, was fully consensual and legal. They argue he's being vilified for being different, powerful, and rich. But the visuals, those organized drawers, that climate-controlled baby oil case, speak louder than 1,000 PR statements. And while Diddy himself has yet to take the stand, public opinion has been forming fast. To some, he's a misunderstood mogul. To others, he's the embodiment of unchecked fame. GH7, not just another tabloid headline. This trial isn't about voyeuristic drama. It's not just about salacious details or memes floating on social media. It's about understanding what power looks like in 2025 and how it can be misused. In today's celebrity culture, private behaviors often become public controversies. But what happens when private choices allegedly harm others? Where does lifestyle end and liability begin? Diddy's trial forces us to think harder about those lines, especially when one person has the money, control, and team to create environments that feel less like play and more like performance. 8. The bigger questions. This is also a story about those who stayed silent. How many people knew? How many went along with the routine because it paid the bills? Brendan Paul's testimony may have been raw, but it also showed just how normal this lifestyle had become to those inside it. That's part of the tragedy. When excess becomes routine, harm often hides behind the glitter, and the trial is making people look twice at that. Mystery. 9. What happens after the headlines? The prosecution is nearing the end of their case. The defense is preparing its final stand. And then, the decision will be handed over to 12 jurors who have seen more than most of us ever will. Whatever their verdict, it will leave a mark. Not just on Diddy's life, but on the broader conversation around fame, sex, and power. This isn't just a courtroom story. It's a warning, a wake-up call, a confrontation with what can happen when someone has too much freedom and too few limits. So, where do you stand? Do these revelations point to a misunderstood man with an extravagant lifestyle, or do they reveal something more sinister beneath the surface? This case could go either way, and when it does, we'll be right here to unpack every twist. Make sure to hit subscribe and stay locked in. We're just getting started.